For thousands of years, kings prized it. Priests interpreted its cries. Sailors carried it across oceans. Scientists reshaped its body. Today, it is so common that it barely earns a second glance. Every year, humanity raises more than 80 billion chickens. At any given moment, there are more chickens alive than any other bird on Earth. They outnumber humans several times over, filling factory farms, backyard coops, village markets, and supermarket shelves on every inhabited continent. It is easy to mistake that abundance for inevitability. But there was nothing inevitable about the chicken. Its ancestors once darted through the humid forests of Southeast Asia, avoiding predators beneath thick canopies of bamboo and teak. They were wild, wary, and impossible to imagine as the foundation of one of history's largest food industries. Yet over thousands of years, this small jungle bird would travel farther than almost any domesticated animal, following merchants, pilgrims, conquerors, and colonists across continents. It helped feed expanding cities. It crossed the world's oldest trade routes. It adapted to empires, revolutions, and industrialization. Eventually, it became the centerpiece of a global supply chain that stretches from soybean fields in Brazil to hatcheries in Arkansas and dinner tables in Nairobi, Tokyo, and London. The chicken did not merely become dinner. It became infrastructure, and hidden inside every roast, every sandwich, and every carton of eggs is a story that reaches back thousands of years. But that is not where this story begins. Roughly 8,000 years ago, the dense tropical woodlands of present-day Thailand, Myanmar, Laos, Vietnam, and southern China echoed with the calls of the Red Jungle Fowl. Unlike the heavy-bodied chickens familiar today, these birds were lean, agile, and brilliantly colored. Males flashed iridescent green-black tails, fiery orange feathers, and bright crimson combs. At dawn, their calls carried through the trees as they scratched beneath the leaf litter for seeds, insects, and fallen fruit. Early farming communities were changing the landscape around them. Forests were cleared to grow rice and millet, creating edges where wild jungle fowl found abundant food. These new agricultural frontiers brought humans and birds into constant contact. Domestication was not a single event. It was a relationship that unfolded over centuries. The boldest birds ventured closer to villages, feeding on discarded grain. People, in turn, learned that these birds reproduced quickly, required little space, and adapted well to life near human settlements. Generation after generation, the least fearful individuals survived alongside people, slowly becoming different from their wild ancestors. At first, however, chickens were surprisingly rare as food. Archaeological evidence suggests that many early societies valued them for reasons that had little to do with meat. Their striking appearance, territorial behavior, and piercing crow at sunrise gave them an almost mystical presence. They became symbols of vigilance, courage, and renewal. In some communities, they were offered in rituals. In others, they served as prestigious gifts exchanged between elites. The rooster's crow marked the beginning of each day long before clocks or church bells existed. Its dependable rhythm connected the bird to ideas of order and time itself. As farming spread across Asia, so did the chicken. Traders carried breeding pairs between villages. Communities selectively favored birds that were calmer, larger, or more productive. Over generations, humans unintentionally reshaped the bird's body, behavior, and life cycle. A creature that had once depended entirely on the forest was becoming inseparable from civilization. It was a quiet transformation, far slower than conquest and far less dramatic than invention. But its consequences would outlast kingdoms. The world's most successful bird had begun its journey, not through force, but through coexistence. As chickens spread beyond their native forests, they entered civilizations that interpreted them in remarkably different ways. Across South Asia, East Asia, Persia, and the Mediterranean, the bird accumulated meanings that often had little to do with food. In ancient India, roosters became symbols of courage and martial strength. In parts of China, they represented honesty and prosperity, their dawn crowing associated with reliability and order. Throughout Southeast Asia, cockfighting emerged as both ritual and spectacle, transforming the behavior of a territorial bird into ceremonies that reinforced status, community, and belief. The chicken had become more than an animal. It had become culture. Merchants moving along early trade networks recognized another advantage. Chickens were exceptionally portable. Unlike cattle or sheep, they required little grazing land. A small flock could travel aboard carts or ships, producing eggs throughout long journeys while reproducing quickly in unfamiliar environments. Few domesticated animals combine mobility and productivity so efficiently. By the first millennium BCE, chickens had reached the Persian world, where they continued westward through expanding trade routes linking Asia with the Mediterranean. The bird's journey was no longer driven by migration alone. It was carried intentionally by merchants who understood its value. The ancient Greeks admired the rooster's aggression and endurance, frequently associating it with warriors and athletic competition. Later, the Romans integrated chickens into daily life with remarkable sophistication. Roman generals sometimes consulted sacred chickens before major military campaigns. Priests observed whether the birds ate eagerly or hesitated, interpreting their behavior as messages from the gods. According to Roman tradition, unfavorable omens occasionally delayed military decisions, demonstrating the extraordinary authority these birds could hold over an empire. At the same time, Roman farmers refined practical poultry keeping. They experimented with breeding, feeding, and housing methods that increased egg production and improved survival. Wealthy estates kept specialized flocks, while urban markets created reliable demand for both eggs and meat. Slowly, the balance shifted. The chicken remained a religious symbol, but it was increasingly becoming an economic one. As the Roman world connected Europe, North Africa, and the Near East through roads and maritime trade, chickens spread into regions where they had never existed before. They adapted to colder climates, different farming systems, and new cultural traditions with remarkable speed. This adaptability would become the defining feature of the species. Empires often relied on horses to conquer territory. They relied on grain to sustain armies. But quietly, almost unnoticed, they also relied on chickens, small, resilient, endlessly reproductive birds that could follow human civilization nearly anywhere it chose to go. The stage was now set for an even greater transformation. Because once the world's trade routes expanded beyond continents and across oceans, the history of the chicken would become the history of globalization itself. By the time the Great Age of Exploration began, the chicken had already crossed deserts, mountains, and inland seas. The oceans were next. Unlike cattle, horses, or pigs, chickens demanded very little from the people who carried them. A handful of grain, a small wooden coop, and enough fresh water were often enough to keep a flock alive during voyages that lasted weeks or even months. They produced eggs while traveling, reproduced quickly after arrival, and adapted to climates ranging from tropical islands to northern Europe. For sailors, they were more than cargo. They were insurance. As Portuguese caravels rounded Africa in the 15th century and Spanish ships crossed the Atlantic after 1492, chickens traveled with them. They landed in coastal forts, colonial settlements, and island outposts, becoming one of the first domesticated animals to accompany European expansion almost everywhere it reached. Yet the chicken story was never simply one of European movement. Long before Columbus, traders across the Indian Ocean had carried chickens between East Africa, Arabia, India, and Southeast Asia. Austronesian seafarers transported them across thousands of miles of open water, settling islands from Madagascar to the vast reaches of the Pacific. Archaeological evidence suggests that chickens reached many remote islands centuries before Europeans ever saw them. Every voyage extended the bird's territory. Every settlement gave it another home. The chicken flourished because it matched the rhythm of empire itself. Colonies needed reliable food before fields could be harvested. Ships needed fresh eggs before reaching distant ports. Frontier settlements required animals that reproduced faster than cattle and consumed fewer resources. The chicken solved all of these problems. As European colonies expanded through the Americas, poultry became an everyday necessity. Chickens scratched around homesteads, military forts, mission settlements, and plantation houses. Their eggs supplemented diets. Their meat provided protein during seasons when hunting failed or livestock remained too valuable to slaughter. But their importance stretched far beyond the household. They became part of global commerce. Feathers filled pillows and mattresses. Eggs entered urban markets. Breeding stock moved between continents. Even waste products found agricultural uses as fertilizer. An animal that had once lived beneath rainforest canopies was now woven into an increasingly interconnected world economy. This was one of history's quiet revolutions. Unlike spices, silk, or precious metals, chickens rarely appeared at the center of royal treaties or naval battles. No empire declared war solely for control of poultry. Yet almost every empire depended upon them. History often celebrates spectacular commodities: gold, sugar, tea, cotton, and oil. These goods enriched kingdoms and transformed economies. The chicken accomplished something different. It sustained the people who harvested those commodities. It fed dockworkers loading cargo in Lisbon. It nourished sailors crossing the Atlantic. It provided eggs to mining camps in the Andes and frontier towns in North America. Wherever permanent settlements appeared, chickens were rarely far behind. The bird had become invisible precisely because it was everywhere. What looked like an ordinary farm animal had become one of civilization's most reliable companions. And as the centuries passed, another force would reshape its destiny. Not explorers or emperors, but industry itself. The history of the chicken is often told as a story of abundance. It is also a story of labor. Behind every expanding flock stood people whose work was rarely recorded with the same care as kings, merchants, or generals. Chickens appeared effortless because millions of hours of human effort remained invisible. Across colonial plantations in the Caribbean and the Americas, enslaved Africans frequently raised poultry alongside small garden plots. These flocks became one of the few sources of food and, occasionally, one of the few opportunities to earn limited income through local markets. The contradiction was stark. An animal associated with nourishment existed inside systems built upon human suffering. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, expanding cities demanded increasing quantities of eggs and poultry. Rural families answered this demand through countless hours of feeding, cleaning, breeding, and protecting birds from disease and predators. Much of this work fell to women. On farms across Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas, poultry keeping became deeply connected to household economies. Eggs were among the few agricultural products that could be sold regularly for cash. In many communities, that income purchased clothing, tools, medicine, or school supplies. The chicken quietly empowered households, even as larger economic systems concentrated wealth elsewhere. Yet industrial markets gradually altered this balance. As transportation improved through canals, railroads, and steamships, regional markets merged into national ones. Small farmers increasingly competed with larger producers who could supply cities more efficiently. The chicken itself was changing. Selective breeding favored birds that laid more eggs, gained weight faster, and tolerated confinement better than earlier generations. Human priorities were reshaping evolution. The bird's body became an economic calculation. By the late 19th century, poultry exhibitions and breeding societies spread across Europe and North America. Prize-winning birds represented status, scientific progress, and commercial opportunity. Farmers exchanged breeding stock internationally, accelerating genetic change. This transformation reflected a broader shift occurring across agriculture. Food was becoming standardized. Markets rewarded uniformity over diversity. Productivity became the dominant measure of success. For countless rural workers, this offered opportunity, but also uncertainty. Families that had relied upon traditional poultry keeping found themselves navigating increasingly competitive markets driven by prices they could not control. The chicken's extraordinary reproductive ability made this transition possible. A cow requires years to mature. A chicken requires only months. Entire generations could be selectively bred within a human lifetime, allowing agriculture to evolve at unprecedented speed. The consequences reached beyond economics. Governments recognized poultry as a strategic food source during periods of war and scarcity. Eggs supplied soldiers. Chickens could be raised close to cities vulnerable to disrupted supply lines. Unlike larger livestock, poultry recovered relatively quickly after conflict. This resilience made chickens invaluable during times of crisis. But it also encouraged ever greater intensification. The pressure to produce more birds, more eggs, and more meat at lower cost pushed farming toward new scientific solutions. The age of traditional poultry keeping was approaching its end. Ahead lay incubators, genetics, antibiotics, refrigeration, and factories. The chicken was about to become something history had never seen before, an industrial organism. The transformation happened astonishingly fast. For thousands of years, chickens had remained seasonal farm animals. Families raised small flocks that wandered freely through fields and farmyards. Meat was reserved for special occasions. Eggs fluctuated with daylight and weather. Then science intervened. In the late 19th century, artificial incubators made it possible to hatch thousands of chicks simultaneously without relying on brooding hens. Electricity brought reliable heating. Hatcheries expanded rapidly, supplying farmers on an entirely new scale. Railroads carried live birds across national markets. Refrigeration changed everything again. Suddenly, poultry no longer needed to be consumed close to where it was raised. Fresh meat could travel hundreds, and eventually thousands, of miles while remaining safe to eat. Distance ceased to matter. After the Second World War, the pace accelerated dramatically. Researchers identified vitamins and nutritional requirements that allowed chickens to grow indoors throughout the year. Antibiotics reduced disease in crowded conditions. Carefully balanced feed transformed growth rates. Then came one of the most influential agricultural competitions in history. In 1948, the United States launched the Chicken of Tomorrow contest, encouraging breeders to develop a bird that grew larger, faster, and more efficiently than any before it. The winning bloodlines became the foundation for much of the modern broiler industry. Within only a few decades, the chicken had been fundamentally redesigned. Modern broilers reached market weight in a fraction of the time required by earlier breeds, while consuming proportionally less feed. Their breasts grew larger to satisfy changing consumer preferences. Their entire biology reflected human economic priorities. This changed everything. Chicken was no longer the expensive Sunday meal remembered by earlier generations. It became everyday food. Supermarkets embraced packaged poultry. Frozen food companies expanded nationwide. Restaurants discovered that chicken appealed across cultures, religions, and income levels. Unlike pork, it faced fewer religious restrictions. Unlike beef, it required fewer resources to produce. Unlike seafood, it could be raised almost anywhere. The chicken became the perfect industrial protein. Behind supermarket shelves, however, an entirely new business model emerged. Companies increasingly controlled every stage of production, from breeding and hatcheries to feed mills, processing plants, transportation, and distribution. This system, known as vertical integration, maximized efficiency while reducing costs on an unprecedented scale. The chicken was no longer simply raised. It was manufactured. This is also where our story reaches the modern world. If you've enjoyed uncovering the hidden history behind one of humanity's most ordinary foods, consider subscribing. Every everyday object has a past far stranger than it first appears, and we're only just beginning to uncover it. By the end of the 20th century, chicken consumption had risen to levels unimaginable just a century earlier. A bird once valued for ritual had become the backbone of global food production. The jungle fowl had disappeared into history. Its descendant had conquered the world. Section 7. Modern reinvention, corporate era, public consequences almost equals 620 words. The modern chicken is one of the most carefully engineered products in the global economy. It exists at the intersection of biology, logistics, finance, and technology. Before a chick hatches, generations of selective breeding have already determined how quickly it will grow, how efficiently it will convert feed into muscle, and how consistently it will perform inside an industrial production system. Around the world, a relatively small number of breeding companies supply the genetic foundation for billions of birds raised each year. The journey begins in specialized hatcheries where hundreds of thousands of eggs are incubated under precisely controlled temperature and humidity. Newly hatched chicks are transported to farms designed around automation. Computerized systems regulate ventilation, lighting, feeding, and water consumption with remarkable precision. Sensors monitor temperature changes measured in fractions of a degree. Farmers increasingly rely on software as much as instinct. Outside those barns lies an even larger network. Corn from the American Midwest, soybeans from Brazil, feed additives manufactured in Europe, vaccines developed by international pharmaceutical companies, shipping containers crossing the world's busiest ports. A chicken purchased in a neighborhood supermarket may represent a supply chain spanning several continents before it ever reaches the checkout counter. What appears local is profoundly global. This is one of the defining features of the 21st century food system. The same efficiency that makes chicken affordable also creates new vulnerabilities. A disease outbreak in one region can disrupt exports across multiple countries. Rising grain prices can reshape food costs around the world. International trade disputes influence what appears in grocery stores thousands of miles away. The bird has become a barometer of globalization itself. Public health has also become inseparable from the chicken story. Food safety regulations evolved alongside industrial production. Processing plants introduced increasingly sophisticated sanitation systems. Governments established inspection programs, refrigeration standards, and disease surveillance intended to protect consumers from contamination. Yet new challenges emerged. Highly pathogenic avian influenza periodically forces the culling of millions of birds in attempts to contain outbreaks. Scientists race to understand rapidly evolving viruses while governments balance public health, food security, and international trade. Meanwhile, consumers have become increasingly aware of questions that earlier generations rarely considered. How should billions of animals be raised? How much land and water should food production require? What balance should exist between efficiency and animal welfare? How resilient should global supply chains become in a world facing climate change, geopolitical instability, and growing populations? These debates rarely produce simple answers. What is clear is that chicken now occupies an extraordinary place in human civilization. It provides one of the world's most affordable sources of animal protein. It supports millions of farmers, processors, transport workers, veterinarians, scientists, retailers, and restaurant employees. It feeds school children, disaster relief operations, hospitals, military forces, and families across nearly every nation on Earth. Few species have become so deeply intertwined with human society. The chicken no longer merely follows civilization. It helps sustain it. Section 8. Present-day legacy reflection almost equals 340 words. The history of the chicken stretches across nearly every chapter of human civilization. It begins beneath the dense forests of Southeast Asia, where a cautious wild bird searched for seeds beneath fallen leaves. It passes through ancient temples where roosters symbolized renewal, through Roman military camps where sacred flocks influenced decisions of war, across medieval villages, colonial settlements, industrial hatcheries, and modern supermarkets filled with neatly packaged meat. At every stage, the bird adapted. When people migrated, chickens followed. When trade expanded, chickens crossed new frontiers. When science transformed agriculture, chickens changed with it. Few animals have proven so remarkably compatible with the ambitions of humanity. That success came with extraordinary consequences. The modern chicken exists because thousands of years of selective breeding gradually transformed a wild jungle bird into one of history's most productive domesticated animals. Its story reflects both human ingenuity and the immense scale at which people now reshape the natural world. Today, billions of people encounter the chicken almost every day without considering the history hidden beneath its ordinary appearance. A simple roast dinner, a carton of eggs, a bowl of soup. Each represents thousands of years of migration, innovation, commerce, and adaptation. History is often imagined through monuments, kings, battles, and revolutions. But sometimes the greatest transformations arrive quietly. Not in crowns, not in palaces, but in the familiar foods that become so common we forget they ever had a beginning. It was never just chicken. It was a companion to civilization itself. Section 9. Outro call to action almost equals 120 words. The next time you pass the poultry aisle or prepare a simple chicken dinner, remember that you're looking at the final chapter of a story that began thousands of years ago in the forests of Southeast Asia. Few everyday foods have traveled farther. Few have shaped human history more quietly. And few reveal so clearly that the ordinary objects surrounding us are often the products of extraordinary journeys. If you enjoyed this documentary and want to uncover the hidden histories behind the foods, ingredients, and everyday objects that shaped our world, consider subscribing for future episodes. And let us know in the comments, what part of the history of chicken surprised you most? And what everyday thing should we uncover next? Because history is everywhere. Sometimes it's sitting right on the dinner table.